Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Welcome everybody to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Today we have Scott Clendaniel with us, who is a data scientist. And his experience is equal parts extensive and guru-like, with over 3 decades involved in a variety of roles, ranging from Vice President of Analytics at Morgan Stanley, the Harvard Innovation Lab's Artificial Intelligence course author, a guest trainer for 3M Asia, and a guest lecturer at the University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins University. Scott has a passion for predictive analytics, machine learning, training and developing teams and leaders, and creating artificial intelligence that can be made accessible to all. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just jump right in. I think a lot of people, they hear data science and they think basically that's a kind of propeller head, like all the super nerdy, hardcore, intelligent people do data science, and the rest of us mere mortals, we just basically watch in awe from the sidelines. So how do you develop a course to bring that? Well, firstly, is it really that complicated? And secondly, if there's a lot of complexity to it, how do you go about teaching people this body of knowledge?
Sure. Well, I may be guilty of the propeller head part, but there is hope. And let me let the audience realize that even I, for the first half of my career, and I am older than dirt, I've been doing this since 1986. First half of my career, the joke was, you can't do this, Scott. You don't have a PhD in statistics. And the good news is they don't say that anymore. So bad news is they say, you can't do this. You don't have a PhD in computer science. And it was like, oh, okay, it just started year 38. It seems to be going okay. Maybe I can. So my background was as an outsider coming into the field. My background from an educational point of view is actually strategic planning. And so this absolutely is accessible. One of the reasons people think that it's so inaccessible is the fact that there are a lot of folks with a lot of financial reasons to make sure that you think that is an approach. So consider that. If I told you that I've got a magic lamp that can predict the future, but only I can use the magic lamp, I've just given you an incredible promise of what you could have and told you that you can't have it without me. That's a perfect recipe to make money, unfortunately. So there is definitely an approach within the industry to make people think that it is as hard as possible. If you want to be able to drive to the grocery store, you need to be able to turn on the engine and operate the controls and the steering wheel and the brake accelerator. You don't necessarily need to be able to calculate the internal combustion ratio. Same thing is true for data science. What is the need? Match the tools to the need and go that way.
So take us through. I mean, what I understand is you've created a course and it was quite successful and you've put it out onto YouTube. Where do you start that journey from? Do you assume everyone kind of starts from a zero base? What about people who come with some existing level of analytics knowledge or data warehousing knowledge?
I assume that everyone starts with a basic knowledge of Excel, that it has rows and columns. Other than that, I assume that people don't know anything else. And the reason why is you need to get everybody on the same playing field. The other issue that I ran into is when I first started training in the field, I would go through a long list of explanations and definitions and charts and graphs and everything else. And you could just see people's eyes rolling into the back of their head, like, why did I sign up for the course? So I stopped that. So instead what I did is I used a low-code tool for everybody in the class that's just drag and drop. Like if you can operate your phone, you can operate this. And then said, okay, click here, click there. Congratulations, you just created your first model. Why did they do that? Well, the model was trash, but that wasn't the point. The point was the learner was so concerned that this was going to be over their heads that was the real blocker. Once they saw that a model could be created, that tension level went way down, and then they could actually hear what I had to say. So I actually learned the hard way to change direction and assume at sort of close to zero baseball.
And if we take a look at the reception that you've got, I mean, what has the feedback been like? I mean, are people now starting to use this as a platform to start to get more hands-on with data science, or is it more just that they've got an awareness, but there's still going to be experts who do this for them?
It depends on what they need. A lot of time, many problems can be solved in Microsoft Excel. And so they can go on to do that. The approach has been pretty successful. I did a course for a leading consulting firm, and it had a 98% recommend to others rate. So it seemed to have worked pretty well. There was one particular student who did not like the fact that it was taught at that lower level. But other than that, it went well.
Well, there's always that one guy, right? So... okay, so just stepping back a little bit, because obviously you've kind of been in data science and now you're teaching people how to essentially apply this knowledge. Were there any interesting insights or revelations when you went through that journey of going from do to teach? It was like kind of almost like a reverse way, because normally I say then going from teach to do, but you were going from taking all of this like this banked knowledge and having to kind of almost go back to the beginner mindset. Were there any interesting lessons or observations you discovered along the way?
I think a couple lessons. One would be you have to make people feel comfortable if you're going to teach something that comes across as sophisticated. I think the old saying goes something like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And maybe that's an oversimplified aphorism, but essentially, you need to connect with human beings. At the end of the day, what most of us do is about people. It isn't about numbers, it's about lessons learned, it's about strategic math. It's about person wants to go on a journey. They're here because they want to be there. How do we make them comfortable to help them on those steps to get from here to there? And so establishing that comfort level would probably be the first lesson. The second lesson is you need to take people through a journey only step by step. What do they need to know to be successful? One of the things that I find very disappointing about a lot of training in the machine learning and AI field is the fact that they want to teach you all about algorithms, and they say you have to have a Black-Cell linear algebra, and you need to see how to do this, and you need to be a Google coder, and well, how do you expect anyone to meet all of those pre-qualifications and be successful? I mean, how old are the people expected to be when they start the journey? So I think it's better to just show them what they need when they need along the road.
Okay. Now, spinning it around a little bit, because you've obviously got a unique insight to data insights, kind of discovering patterns, seeing things emerge from this kind of amorphous like data that we have existing all around us. Where, like, having now built a course and realizing that most analytics around learning and development today are looking at things like course completion rates, open rates, kind of what content was enjoyed more than other content. Coming at it from a data science, where do you see the kind of evolution of these two worlds meeting? How are you starting to observe ways that data science can start to elevate and improve learning and development?
I think absolutely. And I think one of the most important aspects is benchmarking. If you're trying to compare the performance of a MOOC to someone being able to create 6 grade classes, you're going to have a problem because the benchmark is pinned to the wrong measurement. Most people, especially if it's a pre-course, they want to see There's also a large group of students out there who like to collect. And what I mean by that is, oh, that's interesting. I'll purchase it, or I'll save it, or I'll enroll. But that's all the interest that they really have. It isn't necessarily a reflection of the course. So you need to benchmark how you're measuring your success versus similar courses in the field. Another thing is a lot of folks try and get everyone to take their course. And I think that's a mistake because not everyone is interested in everything. They couldn't possibly be. So you need to find out where their audience is for where they are on the journey before they start the course, rather than saying, this is an excellent course, I think everybody should take it.
Okay. Now, having spent a little bit of time in analytics and big data myself, obviously one of the kind of magic powers is this ability to tell stories with information and data. In other words, there's been so many failed attempts in boardrooms where somebody thinks that they've got this miraculous set of information, they take it into the boardroom, everybody's eyes glaze over, and then they sit there frustrated thinking, why did these guys not get it? So storytelling becomes a big part. And for me, I'm just curious as to how you layer that storytelling into your approaches with information.
I think there are a couple things I do. One is to include the Cliff Notes version in the beginning of the presentation. Always have an executive summary slide that answers one question, which is, what is the point of what I'm about to tell you? Imagine that a fire alarm is going to go off 2 minutes into your first presentation or your first training, and you're not going to be able to get the people in your class or your audience back together for another 6 months. They can only look at one slide. What did you need them to know? And to the extent that you can, start with that for a couple reasons. First of all, it gets people engaged in the storytelling. Second, it forces you as the teacher, the trainer, to focus on what's important and to narrow things down, to boil things down. That creates a great springboard for everything else that you're going to do. Analytics are tools. Data science is a methodology. Machine learning, AI, all that stuff. Great. But if it doesn't solve the person's problem, you've got a real issue. Depending on which research study you look at, 85% to 95% of all the machine learning models that are created never reach production. I don't know of any other industry that can survive that type of failure rate. And I think part of the problem is they don't follow the storytelling. Understand what the challenge is. Understand that your internal client or your learner, your student, is the hero of the journey. What is their challenge? How are you going to get them to where they want to be? Not how do you reflect what you would love people to know that you know. And
then, so that's a kind of a great start. But then it's the next almost element in a, if we now look at it as a learning journey. So that the first, I guess, is the storytelling to be able to kind of get by and get somebody to understand and almost kind of initiate the action. But then when it comes to a learning journey, that's often a protracted process. And then it becomes more about how to use data science, analytics, and machine learning maybe to kind of keep someone motivated on the journey that they're taking. Have you kind of done any stuff around that side of things?
Sure. Watch time, dwell time, understanding almost second by second where people start to tune out. Looking at, did they have an initial poor reaction to the first section of the first class? Are you not setting the table correctly for what you're about to train? How many people drop out at a certain point? What is your activity level? So also if you have interactive tools that measure like mouse clicks, pauses, all that good kind of stuff, try and find out where the issue is. So it's more a set of diagnostics than all answers will be revealed from the metric. We need to understand what people react to well and what people don't react to well. Are they completing the exercise? Are the exercises too complex? You're trying to create the engagement and motivation and There are all sorts of wonderful portions about that in terms of how you can gamification with learning, how you do those kinds of efforts, and that's all well and good. But I think the point is, the main thing is to keep the main thing. What are you really trying to do with your course? Test those with objective. Then figure out what are the metrics or the analytics that are going to get you to that place. They obviously need to absorb the material to have any hope of doing that, so that's a big one. But also, where are your fail points and how do you expect that?
And then just, I guess, moving on from there is, so now you've kind of convinced the person, you've got them bought in, you're kind of discovering how to have the kind of most engagement and impact along the way. The next part that I've always been intrigued by is when we start to become more predictive in our analytics. And especially in the space of learning and development I'm curious to see if there's been any, we always talk about personalization, right? Personalization is the kind of holy grail of being basically customer engagement, user engagement. If you can kind of tailor experiences that are specifically tailored to that one individual, then you've achieved basically the holy grail. When it comes to machine learning and predictive analytics, are you starting to see it being used in a learning and development context to start to kind of tailor learning on the fly towards the way that the individual interacts with the content, their background information, like their backgrounds, what they may have learned already, what their experience might be, and starting to see models that are tailoring this journey, almost like this learning pathway for people?
Couple things. There is a great deal of resistance that I've run into in the learning community against doing exactly that. For one thing, it's very different from what folks are used to. Also, it's very different from a traditional classroom environment where you don't really see those metrics on the fly as you go through. This is very difficult to be able to change. The other challenges are, it is a lot more work to do personalization, and many folks just don't have the time to do it. So, for example, if you've got a case where you've got an initial question to understand aptitude, to be able to calibrate learning to multiple levels of aptitude multiplies the effort required to adapt to that. Also, I find that people, if they do adjust their learnings based on data science metric, they'll take it to that step and then they're done very often. It's like, okay, I've got 5 learning journeys. Leave me alone. They don't want to measure how the 5 learning journeys worked, or whether it could be consolidated into 3 because of the level of effort involved. Because now I have to not just teach it one way, I have to teach it 5 ways. It's exhausting. And so people tend to, on the front end, think the data science for measuring learning effectiveness is great. And then halfway through, they maybe not so much.
But of course, we're now starting to see the emergence of kind of large language models being able to generate content. Hence, they call it generative AI for that very reason. So I guess looking at someone who's kind of almost on the front line is, how close are we almost to kind of self-created, self-directed learning, where something is essentially, it's some AI model is trying to understand you as a persona, and then your kind of learning outcomes, and trying to adapt the shortest, most elegant and efficient path for you to get from point A to point B.
Large language models are extremely seductive. Generative AI is extremely seductive. And for the first 80% of what you need to do, they're brilliant. They're stunning. They're breathtaking. The last 20% is where the wheels tend to come off. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So if you look at the issues with LLMs, with issues of hallucinations, of issues of creating false conclusions, of presenting random bits of information picked up from the web as fact, it's incredibly attractive, but incredibly dangerous. It's sort of the femme fatale of artificial intelligence. You need to be really careful with that. So I think in terms of putting the patina on it, fantastic. In terms of the reality, people don't want to take the time because we're all busy. We're all overworked. We're all overstressed. I get it. I'm not picking on people, but to actually go through with it, okay, let's go through The first set of facts that were created by generative AI for this particular learnings did that make that. Let's go to the second. And they often find that editing that is a much larger lift than they expected it to be, and they don't really want to do that.
So, I mean, do you think it's possible almost to democratize that and have the very people who are going through the learning training training these models that they're going through to become, kind of, I suppose, more correct, to kind of identify the hallucinations and the false facts, and starting to almost kind of democratize that process where it's a self-correcting behavior that's being applied?
In theory, yes. But if you look at results from ChatGPT, there was a study that came out, I think it was recorded on Yasmanu Clendaniel, talking about the fact that the ability of ChatGPT to be able to determine whether a 5-digit number is a prime number or not went from over 90% a year ago to under 10% now. So part of the challenge is it's self-learning, but it's self-learning the wrong thing. I think that in the future may absolutely be possible. What I think is there's a lot more work to do than the vendors would like you to believe.
It's interesting though, because that doesn't seem to be slowing anybody down from a vendor perspective of starting to introduce large language models into their products.
Well, because it has a lot of sex appeal to it. Also, if you look at the number of unicorns that have been created from the rush to generative AI, it's astonishing. If you look at the adoption of ChatGPT versus other tools, it had the fastest growth to 1 million users of any product in history, and it was only surpassed recently by a certain chat tool who we shall not mean for thick, so it's talked about it used before six. But you probably know who it is. But up until that point, it was the fastest growth ever. So people want to capitalize on that, and I get that. But if you think about sort of the curve of people's anticipation going out, and then the reality sets in and it sinks down, the challenge that I found with data science and artificial intelligence coming back out of the trough of disillusionment, as they call it, is much more difficult than with other products. People tend to conclude, I knew this AI with just a bunch of false promises, knew we shouldn't use it, I've been proved right, as opposed to saying, I think they need to make some adjustments or fix it here. We've already been through 2 AI winners. I'm a little concerned that we're setting ourselves up for failure because the expectation level is so much higher than what we can deliver right now.
It's the first time I've heard the AI winter. I'm curious, what were the 2 AI winters?
The first was in the 70s, where they ran into issues with just the ability to be able to do the coding. Then in the 80s, the defense industry invested an enormous amount of money, particularly in neural networks and early computer vision for identifying enemy aircraft and that type of thing. And after investing billions of dollars, they were not seeing the result. And so there was a second AI winter. I don't think we're going to go back to levels of 15 years ago, but I can definitely see us going back to levels 5 years ago and saying we're just not getting it we thought we were.
And I mean, it's interesting. It's quite a big gap from 70s to 80s, and then 80s to the 2020s. That's like a 40-year divide. Any particular reason why there was no real activity in almost a half a century?
I think so. I think that the providers of the tools up until recently got much better at managing expectations. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the head of Google AI, I loved her quote from about 2 years ago, when people loved to talk about the Terminator. I don't know why. That's still popular 40 years later in terms of, do we think we're going to have these killer robots who are going to wipe ourselves out? And her answer was, I think we're a lot closer to smart washing machines than we are to creating the Terminator. And I just loved that quote. And I think that people got much better at saying, this is you solve everything. So worry that I have with generative AI, especially since ChatGPT 4, is the fact that that sort of went out the window. Like, yeah, we're going to do everything. I love the photo I saw of a construction site recently that had a big banner hanging outside of the wall yet to be constructed saying, ChatGPT, please finish this for me. Because I think that it did a wonderful job of saying, yeah, it can do amazing things. And my point here isn't to rag on generative AI. My point here isn't to say that this is useless. My point isn't to say we shouldn't be doing it. My point is there's a lot more work to do, and it is not in many vendors' interest to focus on how much work left to do. It's much more interesting to do the big deal on the ta-da and that type of aspect.
So I think then just getting back to the learning and development side is if you are a learning and development person at the moment, I mean, you're as we've discovered with this show and all the people we've spoken to, the days of being a learning development manager who lives in a silo in your organization and just basically is just there to kind of go and find the right content and just serve it up to people is basically now behind us. And if anything, learning and development managers are becoming almost mini CEOs within the organization, having to understand things like marketing and sales and customer experience and engagement, operations, processes, you name it. So someone watching this episode might be basically face palming right now, going, "Oh my God, not another thing." But it's the reality is that data is the lifeblood of every organization, and in the learning and development space, I think that there's been some tendency towards leveraging data and information, but I think it's often too little too late. I mean, I've seen everything from course completion to scary stuff like staff turnover rates, and thinking if you're looking at that information, you're probably too late by now to kind of try and think what's going to fix that in the learning and development space. But putting yourself in the shoes of a person now who has got to take on another mantle, because I can imagine in most organizations, the current data scientists or analytics people are probably more towards the marketing and sales side of the organization, and the learning and development manager probably would be having to beg, borrow, and steal some of their time if they were lucky. So reality is it's probably going to fall on them to try and figure out and navigate the course of how to leverage novel data, novel insights, to come up with ways to get buy-in from the exco. Because I think in many organizations, and I have no idea what the stats are, but my spidey senses tell me that in most organizations, budgets are often kind of, when it comes to human resources, learning and development, that's often where the budget conversation finishes, and often where the money's run out, and then it's like, oh, we've still got to think about HR and learning and development. Okay, well, so I do empathize, because a lot of times these guys need to, really find novel and creative ways to do a lot with very little. But on the other side, more and more of learning and development people are starting to realize that they've got to take control of that conversation. They've got to drive the conversation. They've got to help the decision makers in the organization understand and realize the significance and importance of learning. And underpinning that is data, and being able to take that data and find ways to spin it into compelling ways to change that narrative. Now, it's probably a tough question, and maybe even a little bit of an unfair question, because yes. But if you were putting yourselves in the shoes of someone in a typical organization today, and just think of basically Wile E. Coyote's Acme Corporation, and you've got to kind of sell basically roller skate powered rocket powered roller skates and whatever else, and you were a learning and development manager in that organization. just thinking off like on your feet, like what would be some of the data and insights that you would probably like start looking to leverage to be able to change this narrative of saying, hang on guys, I'm not the person who should be last in the queue. I'm probably the person you should be thinking of as in the front of the queue, because this organization's lifeblood is about people, and people need to kind of be empowered to do the jobs. I mean, we've seen from Gartner and other people that they're saying, 70, and I've heard more recently that 90% of people in every organization today are disengaged. So, a large part of that is sitting in the learning and development space. So any insights or thoughts you have around this kind of complex journey?
Yes, but I'm going to redirect the question upstairs. And what I mean by that is the fact that I think we start in the wrong place and have the wrong objective. So we need to start with, what is the biggest challenge my organization has right now, or what are the top three? Is it our expenses are too high, our revenue is too low, we have low customer approval rates? What are we trying to solve? What is the element of the organization where the biggest challenge exists? That's number one. A lot of us don't do that. We're like, oh, somebody in marketing said it would be really good to have a new course on Google Analytics. I get to change this and that. Just stop. Take a step back. If you're not tying your training and learning to the number 1, 2, or 3 objective of your organization, you're doomed to fail regardless of what your force is, regardless of what your analytics are. So that's the first piece. Second piece is, which of those top 3 issues, if any, can be impacted by learning and development? Not all of them can. We need to figure that out. Once we've gone through those 2 pieces, then we can figure out what we should be offering and how we can measure it and what sort of analytics to put it on. The challenge that I run into is so many people are saying, I know this great course on ancient Indian pottery, and it's fantastic, and everyone should learn it. Most of us are not those people. But most of us are also somewhere in between that extremely silly example and how are we providing value to the organization, how are we going to measure it? And I think a lot of us get caught in the middle, and it's really tempting. I mean, I love feature engineering. Most people don't even know what that is, let alone care about it, let alone understand why it's going to have any business impact. So me going to my organization, fantastic idea on creating this amazing course in feature engineering is really a bad idea. I need to figure out what they're trying to do and how I can help, if at all. That's the second piece. The third piece is to sort of put up the deflector shield against crazy ideas. Oh, the CEO just came back from a golf game with her buddies, and she says that AI is really hot right now, and we need to have a training program for the entire organization because AI is going to be here. Really? Really? Oh, okay. How are we going to measure that? How do we, would you rather have that than people learning to be able to log into the system and use the software that we have on our server? Really? We need to take those steps. Those steps are not fun. Those steps are not popular. I do not enjoy those steps, but they're really important. We need to figure those things out before we get to what are we going to offer and how we're going to measure it. And also, I think we need to be in some position to say, we can't do that. That's not reasonable. Or better, this is how far I can get you with what's available in the marketplace. You also need to ask your stakeholders, how are they going to measure what success looks like? Because if you want to look at completion rates and dwell time and engagement on the exercises and all that kind of stuff, and senior executives don't care, that's a problem. So you can measure it all day long. But again, all of the measurements are tools, are guidance on what happened and what should they do next. That needs to be the path, as opposed to, this is how I'm going to justify this really cool course idea like you.
Yeah, and in doing that, of course, we come kind of front and center with the pragmatism of how I actually get access to that data that I need and how I then work with that data. And I think a lot of people, when they hear about machine learning and predictive analytics, they're thinking of these very, very complex and expensive tools. But I think realistically, and this might be my experience, but almost every single problem could pretty much be solved with a spreadsheet. And it really largely comes to the kind of nuances, or where you really want to kind of productionize something, that you start to think about these tools. But no, I mean, there's very little you can't do with a spreadsheet. But I thought I would ask you if that was just my assumption, or if it was actually something that you believe in yourself.
I believe that 80% of what people need to have done can be fixed with a spreadsheet, so that's a great place to start. It's also ubiquitous. People have access to it. You can share an Excel spreadsheet. There are lots of advantages to that people tend to gloss over. I've had consulting assignments where someone says, I need a predictive model to do X, fill in the line. You show up, and the first thing you discover is that it could be fixed from a simple pivot table or report. Number two, that the report already exists within the organization, but no one is looking at it. It happens a lot more often than you think. I don't think that you're going to generate LLMs from Excel. I don't think you're going to do generative AI from that, but do you need that in the first place? Crawl, walk, run. We need to sort of adopt the philosophy of physician, heal thyself. What are we doing as learning and development experts to say, how well do I know what tools are available and what those tools can do? Have I brought myself up to speed? Have I trained the rest of my learning and development team on what these things are before I go running out and telling everyone else how to do it? And that isn't always fun. You can get remarkably far with a spreadsheet. You can't do everything, but that's okay. None of us can do everything.
Yeah. And I mean, I think half the battle is just taking that first step. And I think most of these kind of projects tend to die when they start off by saying, okay, we've got to create a mini data mart or a data warehouse in order to run these reports, and they need to be produced every week or every month, because that's the best we can do because of all the data in the organization and the processing and et cetera, et cetera. So I sometimes kind of see people struggling with that, almost that continuum, of everything from
Sure.
kind of more established data warehousing to like real-time analytics, to almost just get out a spreadsheet and figure it out on like in like right now type of thing.
Well, let's turn to Teddy Roosevelt. Do what you can with what you have where you are right now.
Yeah.
That advice was well over a century old, but it still holds up pretty well.
Yeah, it's also what I like to call common sense. But yeah, I think it's then I guess the next question is, okay, so if we've established that most people can get stuff done with a spreadsheet, is again, if I'm now looking at Learning and Development Manager, they've kind of pulled some data from across the organization. Maybe they pulled some stuff from outside. They've done some statistical analysis. They've created some compelling data. They're sitting with a learner management system that's giving them information. At some stage, you have that inevitable kind of point in time where you've got to go from ad hoc to kind of predictable, repeatable process. What does that normally look like to you? Like, what do you see as the kind of ingredients or the kind of flags in the organization, when that department that start to indicate to people that now is the time to let go of my childish ways and move on to the next evolution?
I think that one way to do it, and my preferred way to do it, is to take someone within the department who has an interest in that and help them develop the skills to do that type of data analysis within the department, as opposed to, I'm going to go out and I'm going to hire a data scientist, or I'm going to go to Department X, which has a 9-month backlog of requests, and get them to work on it. Understanding the domain that you're working in, which is really important. Understanding the needs of your particular organization, really important. I find it a lot easier to take someone who has that common sense that you talked about, plus domain expertise. and give them the ability to do the analysis than it is to take someone who is already an analyst and has only done that, knows nothing about training and development, and get that person to get to where you want them to be. And again, follow up, what can we do? Employee follow-up report. If you need something more sophisticated, what exactly do you need? You don't have to go from, I've got a spreadsheet, to I've got a building full of PPTs and artificial intelligence. Only go as far as you need to, one step at a time, but with an open mind of what would the next step be, so that you don't create sort of backwaters, or what the technical experts like to refer to as technical debt in that journey. So what do I need right now? What do I need to avoid if I go to the next step, and take it chunk by chunk?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned this term domain knowledge, which I think is a really often forgotten about term. Is that we often think a technical problem requires a technical expert to come in, and then we forget about the significance and importance of domain knowledge. And I think we don't encourage people with domain knowledge enough to actually empower themselves to take those first steps and just try. I think often we end up relying too much on the technical people, and I say that as a technical person. So yeah.
I think also there is a mindset that we all need to work on. For those of us who work on the technical side, to stop viewing people who are new to the field as barbarians at the gate, and to open the gates, let people in, and help them come up to speed. To not spend all day long saying, well, you don't have the expertise that I have, so you can't do anything. Well, they may not be able to do everything that you can do, but they can probably do a lot of what they need. And I just continue to be astonished. A small number of folks that are very vocal about, here's the laundry list of everything you need to be able to do and all the experience that you need to have to be able to enter my domain. And it's silly, and it's arrogant, and it's disempowering, and it's counterproductive. So I really fight against that and fight a lot for democratization.
All right. I think we're coming to the close, but I always like to ask two questions before we finish off. The first is a question. It really just revolves around we try and keep this practical and kind of have our guests share some form of wisdom or a nugget of knowledge about their area of domain expertise. And the challenge I find myself asking this question is that we've actually talked about a lot of very practical stuff already. So asking you, how someone would get started with analytics, I feel we've done that, or how someone would get started with generative AI, we've done that. So I'm going to throw the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons and ask you a completely different question, and that is,
okay,
what is the best advice you've ever been given in your career?
The best advice that I've ever been given in my career is, it's not about you. It's about what the organization needs, what your stakeholders need, and how you can meet those needs. If you do that well, you're much further along than if you focus on you, me all the time. What's my risk, my neck? There's a time and a place for that, and it usually isn't in the day-to-day.
Brilliant. I think definitely some good sage advice. Second and final question is, we always ask someone to share a book, podcast, something that's happened in their life recently that's had a profound impact on them.
I'm going to give a probably surprising answer, and that is to go all the way back to almost 4 decades ago now, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's not for the reason we think. It's not because I think it's going to help you with corporate climbing. It's not because it's going to solve all your training and development needs, but it's just a fantastic starting point for diagnosing what a problem is, where you are in your organization, what you need to develop on your own, what the organization needs to develop on, their own and how to combine the two, I think it does wonders to simplify things. And if I can, I'm going to go with the second one. And that is another surprising one, I think, for training and development people, maybe. Henry Mintzberg, who wrote a book called Power in and Around Organization. This is actually an organization behavior book. And so the reason why I recommend it isn't because I want you to go into organization behavior, or that I think you're going to see everything in it. I'm fascinated. But it does a remarkable job of distilling what are the organizational challenges that you're going to have to tackle, and how do you address those. Those would be good too.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think often we get lost in the realization that organizations are complex, and we need to understand and embrace that complexity in order to navigate it and be successful, or achieve what we need to achieve. So thank you, Scott. I think those are some really interesting suggestions. Sometimes the old is the best, right? So
because I'm really old,
yeah,
I really like that idea.
I was like, when I tell people, I was back in IT when it started and the dinosaurs still roamed the earth. So yeah,
absolutely.
I think you beat me by a few years though. So
it's all good.
But thank you. It's been an absolutely fascinating journey into predictive analytics, data mining, data science, large language models, predictive AI, lions, tigers, and bears, and everything else in between. It was absolutely wonderful having you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.